so we can have a little more attendance for this panel. So let's say about 5 to 10 minutes, and we will start the session. So I just wanted to let you know. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, just for a little exercise this morning, just to get the blood flowing, could I may request you to move forward a little bit, since the room is not full, and I would rather have an atmosphere of intimacy rather than seeing so many empty chairs. So if you don't mind, for those of you at the back, if you could just move forward a little bit, so we're all one family in this room rather than a cold conference atmosphere. So you just have to stand up and walk a couple of seats ahead. No one wants to do that? Please, thank you. Also, as a journalist, and you're always thinking of camera shots. You never want the camera shot to just take an empty room. You want to have people all together. Thank you so much. Yeah. Would you like to move to the front row seats on this side? Thank you. So let's start this morning's session, and I'd like to start by welcoming all our distinguished guests here today and those who made it in to this interesting session, Building Africa's Digital Markets. So I am a digital entrepreneur, and I am a digital entrepreneur who is struggling to build a digital business in Africa. The struggle has been a result of how underutilized and underdeveloped the digital entrepreneur in Africa has been. There is clarity that digital is important to the continent, but that importance, in my experience, has not been reflected enough in the national and the continental agendas compared to areas like infrastructure, health, agriculture, or energy. There is an acknowledgement of digital's importance, but have we really galvanized the powerful and deep capabilities of digital? Digital is a potent and powerful weapon for Africa to project its soft power through digital media, through digital platforms, digital storytelling, the business I'm in. Digital is also key in projecting Africa's hard power, our economic engines in finance, payments, health, and agriculture. We need more chief digital and innovations officers for our cities, our states, and our countries to help execute on our digital innovation roadmaps. By the way, I just want to give a big kudos here to one country represented on the panel here, to Sierra Leone, because Sierra Leone has just appointed a new Chief Innovation Officer who's going to have a seat in the office of the president. So we need more people like that. We need more countries doing that. We need more of those kinds of champions for entrepreneurs like us. It is clear that digital will disrupt and is disrupting Africa, and that is as inevitable as death and taxes. Digital technology with decentralized platforms such as blockchain, content creation and distribution, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, the payments industry, where there's a real concerted effort to disintermediate third parties such as banks, are all aggressively being developed and adopted to bring disruption to Africa. So how are we preparing for this? Africa is the most youthful population on the planet. Many of our jobs in the future are going to be digital oriented. So our economies, our products and services industries must make the digital adjustments to accommodate the population that will need to work. Digital makes it easier to create new job opportunities that are critical. They're virtual, they're remote. These are all things that have to be part of the policy and planning equation. So, as I said, we have a very distinguished panel here today to discuss all of this, and I would really love it if you in the audience would also engage in the discussion. Just raise your hand if you have something to say or ask more specifically to the panel. So we have with us Mrs. Arumna Ote, the Vice President and Treasurer of the World Bank, the Honorable Mr. Jacob Jusu Safa, Sierra Leone's Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dr. Ernest Addison, Bank of Ghana Governor, and the Honorable Dr. M.M. Kati, Special Secretary of the Department of Economic Affairs for the Ministry of Finance in India. Welcome. Mrs. Ote, I'd like to start by asking you, do you agree that the digital entrepreneur is getting a lot of talk and no action?
I would say yes and no. I think that the fact that we're all sitting here today focusing on such an important topic does suggest that the leaders in this continent, and of course the African Development Bank, knows that this is important. And I do think that we have a lot of experience on the continent to show for it. But you had said in your introductory remarks that we have a youthful population. I hear that 60% of Africans are under 30. When I think about my relationship with younger people, I find that when I'm around them, I tend to be able to use my digital tools more than I do when I'm amongst older people. I do think there's a realization in the continent, as you said, that it is inevitable, that it's an imperative that we have to embrace the digital economy. We're told that in about 2 years' time, the digital economy will become 26% of global GDP. And so if we're going to have the kinds of outcomes that we want to have on the African continent, we've no choice but to embrace the digital economy.
So what are some of the things that you think that African leaders should be doing that are not being done or should be doing more of to support the startup community?
Well, first of all, I think that you have to democratize opportunity. If you've got a continent that has more than 1 billion people, what you have to do is make sure that the economy works for everyone. And for me, there are a number of things. The first one is absolute leadership from the top. There needs to be political will. You gave the example of Sierra Leone having a chief innovation officer. So you have to put your money where your mouth is. You must have an ecosystem that focuses on everything. One of which I believe is extremely important is a focus on education, on human capital. You need an ecosystem. So if you focus on human capital, you have to focus on science, technology, engineering, and maths. You have to support the innovation centers. You have to make sure that young people are learning about technology, but they're also learning about entrepreneurial skills, the hunger to make a difference, to solve a problem, that those are the kinds of skills that you have. You have to support what I would suggest the backbone of a digital economy. If you're not investing in the kind of infrastructure that will help a digital economy, then that's not good. I'm quite delighted that South Africa is focusing on making sure that everyone has internet access through their broadband policy by 2020. Finance is important because if you've got enough finance, then people feel comfortable to fail enough times to allow them to succeed. If you don't have patient capital, if people tend to think, IT is an area, or the digital economy is an area that pays for itself. So you find that governments are not involved in that area. So government needs to have skin in the game as well.
And speaking of skin in the game, Honorable Minister Safa, what kind of skin in the game are you putting in Sierra Leone in terms of the policies that are being put in place to change the digital game?
Yeah. So, thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me give you context here. We are living in a country where financial inclusion is quite challenging. we are less than 20% of the population hold accounts. And even the free banks, about 14 in number, are largely rural, are largely urban, they are in urban capitals, with the rural people not financially included. We got a bitter experience during the Ebola response, where 30,000 workers had to be paid and paid on time. For 2 months during the crisis, we were faced with the challenge of strikes because they had challenges of receiving their pay. So at the time, we came to the realization that paying 2 mobile phones would be a very good way. And when we did it for 2 months with the support of the UNDP, we were able to pay them at prompt. So immediately thereafter, the government thought they should move forward on that. So one of the things the government did was to get a national strategy on financial inclusion. And the strategy provides the framework for the Bank of Sierra Leone in collaboration with development partners to devote adequate resources to facilitate the implementation of diverse range of priority actions. I mean, that strategy was the starting point of our policy initiatives. Then the government also introduced what we call fintech challenges and the regulatory sandbox frameworks. The fintech challenges was to solicit innovative ideas in financial technology, wherein players, both local and international, were allowed to come up with financial technologies that will make payment to facilitate payment. Then side by side with that was a sandbox framework. The sandbox framework was more or less to create a regulatory arrangement wherein those technologies could be tested, they could be incubated before they get to the market, and at the same time reduce the risks of financial payment. So then also the government has moved from the policy, is looking at the legal framework. The existing Central Bank Act is not adequate. It falls short of innovative financing. So to avoid any legal issue, the government thought it necessary to review. As I speak to you, the review of the act is going on to see which other areas. Also, in terms of policy initiative, is strengthening the coordination between the telecommunications company and the central bank. We are in the telecommunications company handle the technical aspect, and the central bank handles the financial services. So basically, these are the few moves we've started.
Let's get the perspective of what's going on in Ghana from the governor. What have been some of your priorities and successes?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think that you raised a very critical question. I mean, like all central banks, similar to what my colleague from Sierra Leone said, we've had a major problem with financial inclusion, and we have had to tackle financial inclusion using our traditional banking systems that are more or less urban-based and that have to have branches in order to have geographical reach. In a setting in which you have a very large informal sector where operators are not even registered, are not being even captured by the tax system. So this is the environment in which digitalization plays a big transformational role, because now the issue of geography, the issue of brick and mortar becomes secondary in your ability to reach, financial market players that are geographically dispersed. So this is what we see in Ghana. The central bank has been at the forefront of this process. We set up the infrastructure that was needed by the banking system through the common platforms, having common platforms that links the banking system with the telecommunication companies. Just last week, we have launched the mobile interoperability, which allows for the transfer of flows between the various mobile companies. And the next step is to have the transfers between the mobile money wallets and bank accounts. And when you look at it in terms of the ability to reach the entire country, to reach people who were otherwise completely excluded from the financial system, you can see what the power of technology can do for an area that, as development economists, we've been struggling with this issue of formal sectors and informal sectors trying to, in a sense, coexist. Now we have a very strong instrument, to use to fuse those two sectors together.
When you look at Africa today, what do you see when you look at the digital landscape based on where India is now and where Africa is now? What is it that strikes you about where we are?
See, certain things are very clear. Digitization is well stated, well understood, and well accepted. The question is how to achieve that. It cannot be achieved unless huge amount is invested in digital infrastructure. It is estimated that a 10% increase in broadband penetration will lead to an economic growth of 1% in terms of GDP. If that is so, there's a clear case for digitization. And to achieve that, there's a need to create a policy, environment, and ecosystem which allows digital industry to grow and digital industry to flourish. There's a need to increase the general capacity of the population to adopt to digital technology. There's a need to teach children about digital and information technology and also create institutes of repute like the one mentioned in the last couple of days, the Kigali Institute of Technology, Information Technology, which will generate specialized manpower to handle the requirement of digital revolution. In India, we have done well in digital revolution, in harnessing the benefits of that. How?
What are some of the specific things that you think that India has done that we should be doing now?
We have taken a series of policy initiatives, including market liberalization, spectrum management, digital promotion schemes, broadband policy, telecom policy, and we now have a national digitization policy in place. And this policy basically aims to ensure access at affordable prices, wireless broadband services to the population of the country, and also ensure availability of bandwidth through wireline on demand. And policy environment must be created to attract investment in communication sector. We have done all these with great interest, and that is why India has done remarkably well in the digital economy sector.
Mrs. Ote, would you like to respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. I thought the Secretary will tell us about Aadhaar. Sorry, I thought the Secretary will tell us about Aadhaar because I'm absolutely fascinated by how India, by implementing the identity digital system, has basically allowed more than 1 billion people to have access to the rest of the world. And working with the African Development Bank at the World Bank, we're trying to replicate a similar system for ECOWAS countries. So you've got Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Benin, Burkina Faso, Niger, that are part of this program, which we're working on. We're also working independently with Nigeria on a similar project, because I do think that an ID system is foundational. In fact, earlier on he was saying that the name Aadhaar is actually foundation, because if people can be identified, then they have access to a variety of services that the government can offer. For me, India is a very interesting example also because in agriculture, there are lots of various examples that India has shown the world. One that I like very much is a Reuters Light service, which is available in 10 states in India. And essentially farmers in India have access to data, to advice for 150 crops for 1,000 markets. And some of the early analysis show that farmers have been able to generate about $2 to $3 billion more income. 50% of the farmers have had a reduction in the cost of their inputs just as a result of this. So I think India is a great example for us to look at. But we do have examples on the continent as well. So if you want us to talk about that,
I mean, I would love to. I mean, perhaps the Honorable Minister Safa can give us some other examples in Sierra Leone. Like, what is it that you find most exciting, most potentially disruptive that's happening in your country?
As I said, we're living in a situation where that is largely cash-based and with limited banking services. What is exciting is the speed at which we are moving towards this innovative mode of financing. As I speak to you now, the central bank has established a financial stability department. I mean, and within that department, there is a consumer protection unit. Basically, the work of the stability department is to make sure they mitigate systemic risks associated with this innovative means of financing. We think that's a fair regulatory framework, together with the sandbox mechanisms. Because what is happening, you don't just come with your financial technology and we accept it in the market. First, we have to make sure it's in line with the laws that are in place. Then we also make sure we incubate it for a time within the central bank, at least for 12 months. We are convinced about it, so we mitigate all risks that may be associated with it. In the past, we had financial intermediaries that came to the market, created problems for us, though they were not using high technology, but they had challenges. So we are very cautious as a government to make sure the interest of consumers is protected, the interest of the retail players is also protected. Also is a coordination between the telecommunications company and the central bank that's exciting to me, because I mean, along the line, the technical services provided by the telecommunications company can disrupt the entire system. I mean, you can't expect people expecting to receive microfinance on the 30th of a month, then the technology breaks down. That can create a whole block of inconveniences. We are also looking at using this technology to even effect payment of public sector workers. Because the pay checks are so low, we have a situation where teachers and other public sector workers come at the end of every month. They have to pay transport from remote rural areas to the nearest urban banks to collect their resources. When they do collect their resources, they virtually take everything back. I mean, so it does not promote savings. So in a way, if you decide to use those technologies, they know they can access their money as and when necessary. And they do not need to pay high transaction costs for a mere meager $100, which is basically the minimum wage. So the good thing that is happening in country is the speed at which we are moving on this, and the lessons we learned during the Ebola response, and the governance arrangement we are putting in place to strengthen it, and to protect the interests of the retail players, and at the same time protect the interests of the consumers. That I think is exciting.
Yeah. And Governor, what are your thoughts? You know, one of the things I find most exciting, and it is a trendy topic right now, but it is something that we should be talking about, which is how blockchain is going to disrupt Africa and innovation and payments and pretty much every sector. How do you think we should prepare for it?
I believe that is to me, right? I mean, let me go on the issue of, you know, digitization. I had spoken about the fact that we have found it to be a major solution to the issue of duality in the financial sector, but also to go on to say that the issues important for several aspects, even in terms of tax policy and domestic resource mobilization, which is a major problem in all our countries. If you take the informality of our economy and the potential of using digitization to raise the level of tax receipts, with about, out of formal sector workers of about 6 million, only 1.5 million of those currently are paying taxes. So the ability to use digitization to reach out to informal sector players is very important in addressing the issue of domestic resource mobilization, which is a major issue on our continent. Similarly, the issue of national identification, which is, you talked about the Indian example, and that's the greatest benefit of the Indian Aadhaar, the impact of national identification on the ability of the government to mobilize additional resources. Now, go into the financial technology in a country like Ghana. We are now having people even using the technology to make investments, buying treasury bills, using mobile instruments. Government health insurance payments are being made using this new technology. Even electricity payments are being made using the digital technology, as well as electricity, some of the social service payments to national service students, for example. So it's an important instrument to address some of the key problems that face developing countries. In terms of the issue of digital currencies, this is a major challenge that we have going forward. We still don't have a regulatory regime in place to address the issue of digital currencies. We have made the public aware of that this is not an area that we are currently regulating. So if you engage in the trading of any cryptocurrency, you're on your own, more or less. It's an area that we are still studying very carefully. We are
what have you found in that area when you look at cryptocurrency and how we should all be thinking about it and applying it in Africa, particularly in a regulatory environment that you describe? What are the key things right now that are part of your discussion with crypto?
Well, I think the discussion is more around the buying and selling of cryptocurrencies and whether the traders that are engaging in these transactions are licensed. So this is a major issue that we are currently confronted with. The anonymity associated with these types of currencies and the issue of money laundering and illegal, illicit transfers. These are some of the dangers associated with digital currencies that we are beginning to look at, and we'll have to develop the regulatory framework to deal with some of these things. For example, in dealing with digital money, for example, we needed to come out with guidelines to players in the market to address the issue of KYC requirements, setting thresholds for which you did not have to provide documentation in order to make certain transfers. We probably would need similar things in terms of how to handle digital currencies.
Dr. Kati, if you could weigh in also on how India sees Africa, or through the India experience, how should we be thinking about applying the blockchain, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things to our policy and to our reality?
See, about 1,500 and odd cryptocurrencies are currently in circulation in the world. But as far as India is concerned, cryptocurrencies are not now regulated. It is not a legal tender. It is not a part of the payment system, because as of now, we believe it is not solidly backed by any assets. Therefore, the value can hugely fluctuate. The technology behind the cryptocurrency That is, the blockchain technology is a highly innovative, disruptive technology. While use of that technology for the welfare of citizens need to be welcomed and increasingly focused, bringing cryptocurrency into the main payment system or as a legal tender needs much detailed study and examination, and as of now, we have not allowed it to be part of legal tender, not allowed to be part of payment system. An interministerial group is studying the matter, and we have studied the provisions in many parts of the world, and large parts of the world. This is, cryptocurrencies are not allowed to be legal tender and part of the payment system or officially accepted currency structure.
Is it just because they also will disrupt you guys? It'll disrupt the banks. So you're protecting yourselves.
It is not as simple as that. Currencies are backed by government. It's a legal tender. So if I take 100 Indian rupees from the bank, it is written down below that we hereby commit to pay 100 rupees back to the occupant, owner of this particular note. It is guaranteed by the state. And a guarantee by the state is a solemn declaration which has huge legal backing. Here, if I buy 10 bitcoins, for that matter, any other currency, who is going to back that asset is not certain. Therefore, in countries and places where large number of people are uneducated, they don't know what is the modern technology, digital technology, these kind of disruptive technology before mass scale adaptation need to be done with much care and caution. It is not simple. The panelists were speaking about Aadhaar, so I must say a few words about it. As mentioned to my fellow panelist, Aadhaar is a Sanskrit or a Hindi word which, if you translate in English, it becomes the foundation. Aadhaar is an easily verifiable 12-digit number which is a unique identity given to all Indian citizens. We are approximately 1.2, 1.3 billion. We have crossed more than 1 billion, 1.1 billion people enrolled in Aadhaar, and has these unique numbers. These number, before you get an Aadhaar number, your 10 fingerprints and your iris details are captured in the electronic system. That is permanent. That means no other individual or citizen can have the same iris details or the same 10 fingerprints. Therefore, you get a unique identification number, and this unique identification number enables government to transfer benefits to citizens without any middleman, without any duplication, without any cheating, without any corruption, without any mismanagement. Various services like subsidy, benefits, pensions, scholarship, social benefits, etc. are now transferred or transmitted using Aadhaar. In the process, it is ensured that the right person gets the right benefit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ote, does it worry you that digital also impacts things from a transparency standpoint, from a privacy standpoint? Is this something that occupies you?
Oh, absolutely. But I do want to go back to the questions you were asking about cryptocurrency and blockchain. The underlying technology that backs cryptocurrencies is one that has utility because of what you've just said about transparency. But in terms of having more efficient ways of managing ledgers. So I see, for example, that there's a lot of paperwork in trade finance. It's a big area for us on the African continent, and some of what blockchain offers, because it's a distributed ledger, will allow greater efficiencies, will allow us to eliminate fraud. So to the secretary and the governor, I think central banks should not be dismissive of the underlying technology. Yes, it is important from a fiduciary point of view that people guide their citizens not to be speculative about a new technology. And some people have already gotten their fingers burnt, given what happened with Bitcoin and how it has evolved. But I think the underlying technology, which cryptocurrencies are based off of, is something that we should pay attention to, is what I would say, rather than just dismiss it in that respect. Even for land titling and other areas.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Adesina, for joining us. Thank you. Appreciate it. We're having a vigorous discussion on cryptocurrency here and its future on the continent. Let me ask Honorable Minister Safa, when we talk about privacy and transparency and some of the issues that are posed with moving further into the digital space here, how do you see, or how does Sierra Leone see managing or handling cyber threats?
One of the major risks in digital economy is the issue of cyber threats. I think we stand challenged as a government to see how that can be managed. I must admit that. One of the things we try to put in place, for which we seek technical assistance, is to get a national switch. The national switch that will allow the service providers to communicate to themselves, so that if one service provider can transmit money to another service provider, to somebody else, to another service provider, that allow the operability of all the service providers. And we stand challenged on that. It's still not there. Then, as I said earlier, the issue of financial literacy is also coming as a major threat, major risk, because most of our people do not know about financial inclusion, innovative financing schemes of this type. So, that is the reason also why I said aggressively we're trying to connect the telecommunications company and the central bank to work out the details on the cyber threat. But I must say, all efforts have been made to minimize the risk of cyber security threats, but we stand challenged on that.
And Governor, how does Ghana see this situation, and do you have the skills even to fend off these kinds of attacks?
No, I think it's a major issue. As we described it, you're looking at an ecosystem which includes banks, telecommunication companies. You also have fintechs in there. And each of these are points of vulnerability to the entire ecosystem. What we have done in Ghana is to draft the guidelines on cybersecurity for the banking system. But obviously, the telecommunications side of it also has to be taken care of, similar to the supervisory authorities for the fintechs. So it's really a national effort in trying to address some of the cybersecurity concerns with digitization. But let me go back on this issue of virtual money and cryptocurrencies. That yes, I mean, the message is clear. We understand the benefits of the underlying technology. This is the issue of the ledgers with the blockchain issue. But to go back to say that I don't see it as a threat to central banks. Maybe in terms of its impact on the existence of commercial banks. Because at the heart of the issue is the issue of money. It's a virtual currency. Central banks issue paper on the basis of foreign exchange reserves and other assets. And this is where we derive the value of our currencies. Currently, the major problem with some of these cryptocurrencies is the valuation, the way the values changes rapidly over time, the instability that are associated with with the value of the currency. I think that's a major challenge, and that would mean that we may need to have cryptocurrencies that are based on real fundamentals rather than just the virtual formation of it. But one can also envisage a future where individuals will have virtual accounts in the central banks, and then we would completely, do away with the intermediation role which commercial banks. This is where the issue of disruption comes in. But I think that the central banks would always have a role.
I'd like to address with Dr. Kati how you see the need for Africa to position itself based on India's experience when it comes to making the most of artificial intelligence. What can we learn from India?
See, let me first say one thing which I mentioned earlier also. Cryptocurrency uses blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is a distributive ledger framework whose application can be in many, many areas. What is required to distinguish is the use of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Use of blockchain technology must be promoted, whereas cryptocurrency must be viewed with caution, and mentioned by my colleague, I mentioned earlier, because it is not backed by any assets. Regarding the cyber threat, what are we talking of? See, the average amount spent online, 60 seconds, that is 1 minute, is about 863,000 US dollars. That's per 1 hour, it is more than 52 million US dollars. And per 1 day, it crosses almost 1.3 billion US dollars. We are talking of such huge amount of money. Therefore, obviously, people will be interested in hacking, breaking the system and steal money. But we have men and women of great eminence who is capable of seeing that new and new technology is developed so that nobody is permanently hack and trouble the system. That is not possible. We have learned it from our experience. Coming to artificial intelligence, this is a very emerging area. Developed countries are doing well, but with respect to developing countries, extensive use of artificial intelligence has the potential of displacing human jobs. Therefore, what is required is to work out a perfect balance to see that our educated youth is employed, our educated youth is productively employed in activities, and at the same time, just because of artificial intelligence is there, people are not able to do their job.
What has India done to balance, to hit that balance?
Yeah, that is what should be done. I mean, in India, in many sectors, we have employed, artificial intelligence to simplify human labor and work, especially in medical sector and all, robotic surgery and various other things, where it is extremely difficult for human beings to do extra precision jobs. At the same time, jobs which have the large scale scope of displacement of human jobs need to be viewed with caution and care.
I'd like to open up the conversation to any questions that we have from the audience. Would anyone like to address a question to any of the panelists? Just raise your hand. The gentleman here in the middle. Do we have a microphone in the room? Okay, perhaps you can stand up, and could we bring him a microphone, please, just here in front? And if you could just give us your name and your affiliation, and just keep your question short, please. The microphone is on its way, this way. And I'd really love to get as many questions and make this as interactive as possible. It would definitely be much more engaging as well. Could you please give the microphone to the gentleman? Thank you.
Patrick Conte, the governor for the Central Bank of Sierra Leone. I'm not here in defense of the accusations being...
Sorry, what was your name?
Patrick Conte.
Patrick Conte.
Yes, the governor for the Central Bank of Sierra Leone. It's more judging from or learning from the experience of India. I would like to weigh in on the issue of regulations in these discussions of digital technology. I think we only need to reflect on the hard lessons of the financial crisis in 2007, 2009, and be aware of the issues of risk surrounding all of these discussions, and why regulation is very, very paramount. Because at the end of the day, it's about protecting consumers. So the issue is, judging from the Indian experience, how do we sequence all of this? Is Africa really up to it in terms of the regulations needed? Do we have the entities in place? Who oversees digitization in the financial system? Who oversees digitization in telecoms? The issues of cybersecurity comes into the middle of it. What comes first? Is it that we allow digitization to take hold before the regulations are developed, or do we develop the regulations, develop the entities responsible? I think that's the critical issue that needs a thorough debate. As I said, we only need to learn from the experiences, the hard lessons of the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. So my question is, what comes first? What's best practice in terms of sequencing all of this?
Dr. Kati?
There is no ready-made answer to your question. I mean, this is a chicken and egg situation. But what I personally feel, that both should go together and evolve together. When digitization takes place, the government and the people will know what kind of regulatory and policy framework to put in place. We learn from each experience, and from the experience, we must build legal and institutional mechanisms. See, what has happened in India? India's e-commerce industry today is $38.5 billion and will reach $200 billion by 2026. Put policy together, also put regulatory system, at the same time allow businessmen, entrepreneurs to grow. You may all be knowing about Flipkart. Flipkart is an Indian e-commerce company. Since it was doing well, the investors included Microsoft, Tencent, and SoftBank. What has happened last month? Last month, a company which is not even 8 to 10 years old has been taken over by Walmart by paying $16 billion US. And 20% of the Flipkart was owned by SoftBank, and Walmart paid another $4 billion to buy that as well. What I am saying to you is that you don't know the potential of e-commerce. It is so tremendous, so huge. I can mention you so many examples from India, but this is one of the most well-known examples on the global scale, in the global arena. Therefore, don't wait for one for the other to happen. Let the both grow together.
But are there basics? But are there basic building blocks, or in the sequential debate? Or I mean, is there a foundation that needs to be laid first before they can both grow together, or you just see them inherently as operating in parallel?
No, that I mentioned at the beginning itself. The foundation in terms of policy framework must be first put in place. An effort from the government to promote digitization through policy instruments must be first put in place. Otherwise, things won't progress.
How does Ghana see it?
No, I agree that you need a basic regulatory framework to be put into place before going ahead. But also you have to ensure that the regulations are not so tight as to stifle the adoption of the technology itself. And I believe this is the reason why the notion of a sandbox where people can experiment with some of these ideas comes in. Again, as I said, if you look at the whole ecosystem in terms of the financial digitization and mobile money interaction with banks and telecoms. You see that the entry points, the weak points are with the three segments: the banking segment, the telecommunications segment, and of course, mobile money agents as well as other fintechs. Once you can, in a sense, address the security issues that are attached with each of these segments, you should be able to address the security issues for the entire ecosystem.
I'd like to take another question from the audience, please. If we could give the microphone to the gentleman here with the blue shirt. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Mahesh Kotacha. I'm from New York, but I do a fair bit of advisory work in Africa, particularly with the banking sector. A big issue for banks has been retail, and retail leads to mobile. Africa has seen huge growth in smartphones that may reach, that may be already at half a trillion, maybe pushing, or several hundred million anyway, and they may reach in the next 5 to 10 years a trillion. This allows retail banking, but also raises challenges as to regulation with respect to AML, KYC, fraud, and non-bank finance companies doing banking business through mobile channels and the like. I wonder if the governor might address that and perhaps others chime in. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I believe that was to me on the issue of the challenges with mobile money. Yes, I mean, this is something that we are grappling with. As I said, we had established guidelines for the mobile money agents. We had thresholds for various amounts of money that you could transfer without necessarily supplying the required documentation. But above a certain threshold, you'll be required to, provide all the data that is required to avoid, the issue of money laundering. There are also issues of fraud. These are some of the challenges that come with mobile technology and the effect of, having some of these cyber attacks into the system. So these are real challenges that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And we believe that, we will find, appropriate solutions to that. There are also issues on data privacy. This is another major challenge that we have. And the Data Protection Act, being able to implement some of the provisions of that act, I think will help us in this area.
Suzote?
I was going to make a comment that cuts across both this last question and this last comment and the earlier comment, which is a bit similar to what the Secretary from India talked about the right balance between allowing innovation to thrive and regulation. I see that there are a number of central bank governors in the room, but in the past when I looked at Kenya and compared what happened in Kenya to what happened in my home country, Nigeria, and in India, in mobile telephony, my assumption was that the central bank allowed mobile money to thrive in ways that didn't happen in my country or in India.
You're referring to M-Pesa?
M-Pesa, yes. The central bank kind of just got out of the way and allowed mobile money to start while, and I'm glad that the central bank governor of Nigeria isn't here, or the central bank governor of India, while in these two countries, where the potential is even higher because they're larger populations, they were trying to make sure that the telecom companies partnered with a bank, and the regulation was just stifling. And look where we are. And so it is important to focus on the risks. I'm not diminishing them. But I think we're at a point in Africa where we should allow many of these technologies to thrive. And if we see what's happened with M-Pesa and what it's generated, I mean, today we're talking about not just 25% of Kenya's GDP going through M-Pesa, but also we're talking now, we have insurance, we have so many other products that are going through, and Kenya became that incubator for innovation, which is being replicated around the world. So for me, it's, you know, it's more that we should have the right balance, particularly as senior leaders on the continent.
Yeah.
Honorable Sisifa?
Let me just come to this sequencing between the innovations and the regulations. The reality is that the digital economy is started by private sector operatives, the mobile companies. And it's more likely that it will start, grow before the regulations come in. Regulations are usually the domain of government. And we cannot avoid that. That's going to be the reality. Until it starts thriving, before we start thinking about regulations, it's going to be difficult for African countries to sit down and anticipate. But there's also a value when it starts on its own. You understand the weaknesses, the strengths, and probably when you're doing your regulations, you have a clear picture of the practical realities. Because to regulate something you have not experienced, there's some risk also. I mean, issues of cyber attacks, for example, may be an unknown area if you do the regulations before the scheme starts. So in real life, because the regulations is the domain of government, the other is led by the private sector, it's more likely that the private sector will take the lead and the government will follow.
Let me take some more questions from the audience. I'll go to the back of the room and then back to the front. Could I just give the gentleman right at the back the microphone? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is George Heinen from the Ministry of Finance in Luxembourg. I see we are lots of government people here in the room, central bank governors and so on. I hope that there are some private sector people here as well. Because I think it would be very important to get the perspective from private sector operators in digital technology to tell us a little bit what their challenges are. I mean, what the obstacles they are facing when they want to develop their technology. Because after all, it is from the private sector that the innovation comes, and the public sector can only react to what comes out of the private sector. So here I have the impression that it's the other way around, that the public sector tries to regulate first before the private sector comes in. So I think I would have preferred a little bit the other perspective. Thank you very much.
Is there someone in the room that would like to speak to that point? Talk about individual experiences? Yeah. I would like someone to directly address that question. This gentleman here in the red.
Bonjour. Moi, je voudrais poser.
Hello. My question is more of a general nature. Let me give you a bit of time to put on your earphones. Hello, can you hear the interpreters now? Can you hear the interpreters? Can you hear the English booth? Can you hear the English booth? What I was saying was that my question is more of a general nature question, just to learn from countries which have already been making some initiatives. In a country where you have just one telecoms operator, do you think that you can really have innovation, technological innovation, bloom, everything being equal?
I'm really sorry, I wasn't able to hear all that.
Can I respond to the question?
Yeah, could you just repeat it as well?
No,
Thanks.
what is, if I understand him correctly, what is he asking is, where there is only one telecom operator, whether technology can bloom. That's what he's asking.
Okay.
It's a very valid question. Before I answer a question, I would like to respond to the the friend from the Luxembourg, I fully agree with him that innovations by and large takes place from the private sector. Therefore, the main role and function of the government is to see that you create an ambience and an environment by which innovation flourishes. Where there is gaps, the government agencies must be able to immediately jump in and provide that space so that innovation further flourishes. I will tell you an example. We had a private entrepreneur in India who was developing an e-commerce payment system and a digital wallet company. Immediately government intervened and central bank created a policy instrument so that the people like him can be licensed and allowed to be part of the government payment system. And today, within maybe 10 years, within a decade, in 8 years, the company is working for 8 years, is a $10 billion US company. So what is important is we must allow private entrepreneurship to flourish, innovation to flourish. If there is no regulatory framework, if there is a gap in our ability to handle them, the government must jump in immediately and allow that to further flourish, not to stymie him. Coming to the issue of whether innovation is possible in respect of a single telecom operator, generally competition leads to innovation. There may be exceptions. Therefore, policy instruments should be developed in such a way, it should allow all entrepreneurs to contribute and to develop their own products. Therefore, ideally speaking, a monopolistic situation, whether in government sector, whether in private sector, may not be always conducive for innovation.
Like Ethiopia is an example of one monopoly in a dominating telecom industry. That I think just yesterday or the day before loosened up slightly, but not open to foreigners, and it definitely doesn't have the innovation energy in that space because of the domination of the one telecom company. Did you want to add something there?
I was going to give an example from my home country. It had a telecom monopoly a little over 20 years ago, and the liberalization came when the private sector bid for the mobile telephone licenses, and we moved from 450,000 telephone subscribers to 120 million today. So of course it is clear that you do need an environment that encourages competition. But I think that there are other models around the world that also show that if you have the right ecosystem, that you may need an entity that is initially supported, and that what is important is the ecosystem and not necessarily the operator itself. And I think both the governor, the Ghanaian central bank governor, and I talked about just having an ecosystem. So it's not just about the operator, it's about what do you have. And it gives me a chance to respond to the earlier question about what are some of the challenges that private sector operators face. And you should be answering that question, Zane. But I did want to say that a big one is capital. And I think we haven't spent enough time on talking about financing. I was shocked to hear at our own spring meetings that only about $200 million had gone into the continent as a whole for startups. It's not enough. The example that I always like to cite is what Israel has done in supporting startups. Many of you may be familiar with the book Startup Nation, where the author talks about Israel having 30 times the investment dollar per person than Europe has. And so if you encourage capital to flow to startups, people can fail quicker and therefore succeed quicker. The second thing is that most people have always assumed that technology sector is a profitable sector, so the private sector can do it. What we've seen more recently is that you do need government to put in some capital, and you do need multilateral agencies like ourselves. So I think it was the Prime Minister from Rwanda who was saying at the opening panel that the government is seeding $100 million innovation fund, and that the African Development Bank has provided $30 million of loan to support that. So you do need blended finance so that the capital can be patient for learning to happen, for innovation to happen as well. But when we talk to entrepreneurs across Africa, the big thing is really the kind of capital and more innovative finance that supports new types of models of innovation.
Speaking of failing quickly, I could definitely add to that. You know, I'd just like to address a couple of issues without making it necessarily about my company, but the greatest challenge has been financing. And you know, I have beat down doors, worn out shoes, started off feeling quite confident that I would receive something, but I received nothing. And as a result, you know, the 1.0 version of the company is unable to continue. So I need to pivot the product and understand, sort of from a product market perspective, why didn't I get that fit? Because I needed the seed angel money, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of other entrepreneurs I have engaged with across the continent need to find access to that capital. So the financing element was a huge obstacle to doing something that everybody in this room likes to talk about, which is we must own Africa's story. We must not let Western countries tell our own story. And here we were, doing exactly that, but did not receive any financing to do that. And I argued with my Nigerian co-founder that this is soft power. We need to own our stories. You know, you have to invest in the storytelling, content creator community of the continent, which is way better than any PR firm that you would hire in New York or London for, you know, for a lot of money. You have your own creators with smartphones that know your countries and know your stories and are authentic. So that was a major challenge. What really hurt me when building a talent accelerator within the company, because quality content was an obstacle, not just content creators, but giving the skills to creators was a big challenge. But the main issue in building the accelerator, which runs in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Rwanda for now, was payments. Like, I got killed, you know, with fees and different payments in the different countries, and this one is PayPal and this one is M-Pesa, and there was no homogeneity Pan-African-wise to make the payments. So I spent thousands of dollars in the grant money that we got to run this accelerator in fees. And, you know, it really hurt us. And, you know, skills are another area. I wish we would get more support, because we can bring all sorts of people from around the world. We can partner with General Assembly. We can, you know, we can really add jet fuel and jet fire to the amazing content creators that exist in every one of your countries. And we, you know, we can't always do that because it's not that they don't have the talent, it's that they haven't been given the opportunities, or they haven't been skilled up in order to create the kind of content that would create a quality supply that in turn would create demand. I'm arguing that if we create the supply, the demand will come. And I've struggled with that, and you know, it's been rough. And the last thing I'll say is I wish we had the equivalent of Y Combinators, for example, in every African country, or something where the African entrepreneurs didn't have to go to Silicon Valley to make their pitches. That there was something as exciting and sophisticated on the continent that would invest in telling our own stories. I'm coming from a storytelling perspective, but I can tell you that across the entrepreneurial board, coming up with innovative ways and financing accelerators like that would be valuable. Anyway, I didn't have a question in that, but perhaps, so maybe the question is, how can we fix it? And perhaps, the panel can weigh in, not necessarily specifically with what my experience has been, but the universal message that I'm bringing.
Maybe the issue I want to touch on is about the capital requirement. I mean, Madam spoke about we need capital because we just cannot assume the private sector comes in. But I would like to caution us to be very clear on capital for who. I think when it comes to the public sector requirement for capital, it should be basically for building the infrastructure backbone, the platform to accommodate innovative financing. But we're very careful. In terms of real investment, it should be left to the private sector. So maybe we need capital, but capital to be channeled largely to the private sector for this type of schemes. Because the moment governments rush into getting into it, because the reality is that the government cannot even manage the state-owned banks they have. So you give them complex technologies of these types, innovative financing, they can just create a whole problem out of it. So we should allow them to just be the backbone, the platform for innovative financing to strive. That's my question.
I think that's a good point to raise. Do you agree? What do the other panelists think? Do you agree or disagree with that? That it should just be the role of the private sector, and the government
has to
should
have some skin in the game. They may not be the one that should manage the blended finance, but they need to put some of their money because there is learning, and when you have skin in the game, there is more learning than if you don't have skin in the game. And so, blended finance that brings together multilateral agencies, brings together private flows, and there are a lot of private flows that are waiting to see how things go before they get involved. So the ability to de-risk our entrepreneurs and to support them has to come from multilateral agencies and governments getting involved. I'm not saying they themselves should manage the money, but certainly they need to invest in the backbone. They need to invest in broadband as well, in addition.
Dr. Addison, how do you see it? I mean, I would like to see more skin in the game from everywhere, but is it something that should just be pushed predominantly to the private sector and have government just facilitate the backbone, or not?
No, I think the regulatory framework is important. You mentioned the relationship between innovation and competition, and I think once you have a framework which allows competition, the private sector would be motivated to perform within that environment. But to the extent, I mean, you're looking at, fintechs, which are really startup. I can see the argument from Aruna's point of view that to encourage fintechs, which are largely small startups in our various countries, some type of blended financing would also be useful in that environment. Back to the issue of the monopoly, even in a country such as Ghana, where we had 3 telecommunication companies, you see that there's a dominant player in the market. And even within the context of a competitive system, you could have a dominant player, but you still have the competition driving the innovative products within that setup. And then again, I don't know why it didn't work in Nigeria, but in the case of Ghana, one of the initiatives that the central bank took was to require telecommunication companies to set up subsidiaries that partnered banks in providing the mobile money application. So, and that seemed to have worked very effectively in the Ghanaian context.
And Dr. Kati, how about in India? How has India been most effective in supporting its entrepreneurs, its startup community? What was the most successful approach that you've observed?
In India, we have a variety of programs and schemes to promote these kind of initiatives. We have Startup India scheme. We have so many such schemes. That is from the government sector. What is important is, if the innovation is implementable, workable, then private institutions, institutional investors, angel investors, and large number of people are willing to fund it. The limited issue is that the capacity of the entrepreneur, the innovator, to prove to the fund providers, yes, this is workable, this is implementable, this is going to be successful. There are companies, e-commerce companies in India, young companies, which have recorded more than 100% growth in just 1 year. And they are on a year-to-year basis, they are $5 billion, $10 billion, they are just growing like this. So what is required? What is required is, if you are looking for fund, you must see that you are able to convince fund providers, either in the private sector, or in the government sector, or in the institutional investment sector, that yes, I have a bankable proposal, I have a workable proposal, then fund will come. Otherwise, you have to depend on government with the limited resources they have to fund your schemes.
Let's take another question from the audience there. I can't see, we haven't had, there are lots of governors from the central bank. We haven't had any female questions from the audience. Is there a woman? I can, just for gender balance here, I mean, come on. No? All right, well, okay.
We give up our votes.
All right, we have quite a few. How about we just start with this gentleman with the red tie, and then over here in the front. You've been patient. And then over there. So let's start with the red tie.
Yes, good morning to everyone. And I'm Rogério Zandamela. I'm the Central Bank Governor for Mozambique.
Could you speak up a bit, please?
I'm sorry?
Yes. Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Now yes. We can. Oh, yeah, now we can hear you.
Yes, I'm saying good morning to everyone. I'm Rogério Zandamela, Governor of the Central Bank of Mozambique. I just would like to hear a little bit from panelists and perhaps even from my colleagues here in the audience. What is we haven't talked too much about the role of banks in this process. As we embark in this journey in Mozambique, what I have noticed is that the banks are very skeptic on issue of developing RegTax, on issues of developing even a national switch, especially when it comes to bringing mobile operators, fintechs, as provider of financial services. And they can make things quite difficult because they are sort of like the elephants in the system. And I will suspect that some of the experience when I hear about Nigeria, about Kenya, the reason why they may have evolved differently may have to do with the roles of the banks in that exercise, in preventing some initiatives from going forward. That's it's a comment. Second question, I have also been in my previous incarnation working on Somalia, where mobile money is the way to go. It's either that or you have nothing. It's a country that has imploded with no modern payment system as we can think of it because it doesn't have any current. So pretty much everything you do, it's a dollarized economy. You buy and you sell everything just using your mobile. It's not an experience that is known because in part because of the war, very few people have dared to go there and understanding it. Perhaps the few who understand it very well are the Kenyans because more than 20% of the Kenyan population are from Somali heritage. And some of the companies that operate in Somalia are the same that operate in Kenya. So sometimes we even give credit to the Kenyan things that are developed by the Somalis.
Actually, as a Kenyan, that's not quite true.
No, but there's
you know.
no, in terms of, maybe I'm not politically correct, because those Somalis I'm referring to, they're Kenyans. They're born in Kenya, they're Kenyan citizenship. But the difference here is, as you go to Somalia, you don't have a national ID. You can talk about it. There is no ID, in fact, that you can talk to most of it. But somehow, that sector has evolved, has expanded, and it's everywhere, up to the most remote areas of the country. Maybe something we need to learn from ourselves, because sometimes we use it as an excuse of not going forward in some of these areas, to hide in particular the roles of the banks in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone on the panel like to respond, the elephants on the panel?
Yes, I mean, what he just said in terms of the banks being very skeptical reminds me of the Ghanaian experience when the discussion on common platform came up. So much so that the central bank had to establish a subsidiary to drive the common platform for the payment system. And then today we have all the banks connected to that platform. This is the GH Link. But I think that over time the banks have become very responsive to the issue of digitization. They do not want to be left behind. All the banks are currently, providing the service, the mobile money service, and they are bringing in applications every day for us to license new products which would allow them to take advantage of the digital technology. So yes, initially they were skeptical, but that has changed rapidly.
Could I bring the microphone to the front row, please? Oh, you've already made the point that you made. Okay, all right. How about the gentleman in the middle with the blue tie? Thanks.
Good morning. Zen, it's good to see you. My name is Tom O'Weir. We still miss you, KTN. It's been a long journey. I think one of the issues that I've been waiting to hear is how we engage the youth and the young people. Because in digital economy, here is one area where, without any doubt, the youth are the leaders, both in innovation, entrepreneurship, coming up with new ideas. So when I think about access to finance as a major hindrance to innovation, and if you unpack that, you realize immediately that the biggest victims of access to finance are the young people, and they have the most brilliant ideas. So I want to hear from our governors, where do we create space for young people? Especially when we're having, conversations like this. Where are they? Are we listening to them? Now, when you go back to our countries, are we creating space so that we can listen and promote? And when you think about the fact that some of the major IT companies were sort of creation of brilliant people who, I would say, quote unquote, dropped out of school to go and innovate. Does that say something about our school system? I mean, is there anything that we need to fix so that we can have these ideas blossom in our education systems? But I want you to respond to two issues: creating space for them in the policy space, but also how we enhance access to finance, unpack that. They don't have 10 years credit history. They don't have collateralized, assets that can give them access to finance. So where is their space? Thank you.
Who would like to answer that?
I can start. It's an extremely important question, and there are several examples. In my own country, Nigeria, the various governments have had various initiatives, and one, when I was in government, which people really liked, was the UWIN program. And UWIN was targeted at young people and women. The administration of the initiative was to make the funds quickly available, but to also provide more than just money, to make sure that successful preneurs can be mentors. So you get money, you get all the kind of support. Of course, the government benefited enormously because these businesses became registered businesses when initially they wouldn't have been registered businesses. Zain and I met in Nigeria under the auspices of the Tony Elumelu Foundation initiative. I mean, Tony has said that in 5 years he would provide $100 million of funding, $5,000 on average, to entrepreneurs around Africa. So you're seeing a number of the very successful businessmen and women across Africa also providing similar types or doing similar types of initiatives. The third that I would like to mention is Alipay. I mean, our IFC has a partnership with Alibaba's and financial services, and many people know that they provide small and medium scale enterprise loans within, some people tell me it's 3 seconds, because they're leveraging big data. They have enough information to be able to make that decision. So I think that's an area that has to be supported. In the West, an example that I like very much is that a lot of the large companies are part of what you call, in the UK, they're called circles, they're venture circles. So they basically have these small entities continue to innovate, and large companies go to them to work on specific initiatives. I haven't seen a lot of that on the continent yet, and I think that would be important, that the large companies partner with the small young people and have them create businesses. At another event like this, someone mentioned the fact that because we're focused on traditional procurement practices, when there's things to be procured, it always goes to either the established Western companies or the established businesses on ground. And we need to find ways to have the people who are not as experienced partner with these larger companies and also so that they can grow and learn is the other thing that I would add.
Dr. Addison, you wanted to add something?
I think the gentleman raised a very important issue on the youth. If you look at the new payment systems bill that we have in Ghana, that is going to allow fintechs to participate directly in the payment system space. They do not have to have an alliance with any bank in order to do that. So that would create a lot of opportunities for the youth who are, the active players in the fintech area. The Vice President had led a team, mainly these are the youth, to Silicon Valley barely a month ago. Just before we came here, we had a meeting with him, with some of the participants in the space. We are meeting them on Monday to discuss the ways in which we could help them address some of the challenges on the access to funding, which I think it's an important initiative. The current focus of the initiatives that we have in the country are focused more on the employment side, youth employment, but I think the issue of setting aside funding to finance some of these startups that relate to the youth, it's very important.
Would anyone else on the panel like to weigh in on creating space for youth? Always happy to get the India experience because you've done it so well.
Sorry, I had one issue. Shout out, because I spent my career in the capital market. Another area that governments need to support is support exchanges as they build the alternative platforms. Because it's not just about startups starting, it's about them growing into bigger businesses. So being able to create the environment where you can have IPOs and have the Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world see value in their company allows others to aspire and prepare their company. So that transition past startups is also important.
Anything else?
Yeah, well, in terms of creating this space for youth, I think it's unavoidable. I mean, particularly in our context, where the youth dominates the small and medium scale enterprise sector. And a good number of microfinance beneficiaries are the youth. And so there's no way they could be left out of the digital system, economy. And the thing we may probably have to do nationwide is to improve on financial literacy. I think it's important because we're talking about large number of uneducated youth who we may have to probably provide them what I call functional literacy. Functional literacy, because if they are not functional literate, that's going to be the great challenge. I mean, using digital systems in agriculture is going to pose another challenge because most of the people in agriculture cannot read or write, and you really require that. So promoting functional literacy, in particular financial literacy, is an imperative, I guess. So creating the space for youth, we have to make sure we tackle that.
Anything else?
Just 2 points. Youth should be made part of the national planning strategy. They're a powerful force, growing force, active force, innovative force, and they should be effectively, must be made part of the national building process. In India, we have a lot of financial assistance schemes providing assistant use for entrepreneurial activities of various types. 2 things I just want to mention to the audience here, what we have done in India, may not be specifically in the context of youth. Generally, we have developed something called a government e-market, because one of the panelists was saying that procurement is a complex issue. There are various issues related to that. It's correct. She is very correct. What we have done, procurements of goods and ministries by all central government agencies have been made mandatory through a portal known as GEM, Government E-Market Portal. All the activities from registration of buyers and sellers to purchase and even payment to the sellers are all made online. What are the benefits? The benefits, anybody and everybody who is making the product which the government wants to buy can get it registered online, display their product, and then government is in a position to buy from them. As on date, 22,820 buyer organizations, more than 100,000 sellers, and 267,000 products are available online. These are not big firms. Many of them are small firms. Many of them are firms run by youth and young entrepreneurs. So there is no difficulty in selling those products now to the government. You go to the portal, get yourself registered, describe the product you are making. The government will ask for quotations based on the rates. You can purchase. I mean, the government can purchase. So entrepreneurs, young persons who are developing products, at least in India, now government is in a position to buy it.
What's the percentage of products that the government has bought under that?
All which the government requires.
But how many products have?
Now it is 268,000 products are now in the portal.
Great ideas. We just have time for like a couple more questions. Any youth in the room that would like to weigh in on this discussion about you? I don't qualify anymore. Okay, all right. Okay, good. Oh, did you raise your hand? Oh, excellent. Yeah, could I bring the microphone to this side of the room, please? Yeah, and then we can go back. Thank you. Oh, we have it. Thank you.
Hello. I kind of waited until other African women ask a question. But, since it's not, let me ask a question. My name is Angela Juyong-gang from South Korea. I'm a founder and president of GSEP Global Competitiveness Empowerment Forum. I'm a B20 and then Women 20 member of South Korea. But my question goes to, for digital industrialization, what kind of a public policy to include senior citizens of your government? Because I know Africa majority is youth, over 60%, but for this inclusive growth, I think senior citizen is also important. WHO issued the new definition of age that until 65 it's young, that from 65 to 80 it's middle-aged. I'm sure that there are so many young or new definition of middle-aged citizen, but so I'd like to ask a question that what kind of policy to support their inclusion? Thanks.
Who would like to address that question
I'm
on
not quite
older people?
Sure if I understood the question. It has to do with the retirement ages in respective countries, I believe. So, well, I mean, it's related because I think one has to look at it in terms of whether we can delay the retirement age, and that should probably help the pension system in terms of delaying the number of years that people begin to benefit from, retirement benefits. Currently, the retirement age in Ghana is 60 years. And when people retire, I know that the Social Welfare Department has a few programs that addresses the needs of the aged. But I think your suggestion is for us to increase the number of years that you work before you go on retirement.
Yeah, and she wanted to focus more on the inclusivity and what kind of public policies are being undertaken in order to look at that 65 to 80-year-old bracket in Africa.
Just in short, that what kind of public policy for senior citizens to include digitalization?
Right. Yeah. Would you like to add, Minister?
Well,
and then,
if I understood it clearly, I think it's more in the area of payment of pensions, because pensions money generally are low, and for people who retire, they retreat to their small communities in the rural areas, traveling to the bigger towns for pension, for the pension, monthly pensions, paying high transport costs. That's too huge on them. So if we want to improve on the real value of their pensions resources, is to see how you can link them up to this innovative financing scheme. I think they have a place, it will benefit them, but I see it more in the area of pensions. Because with the exception of a few, maybe 60, 65 you can work, but above that, they are generally not very agile for the productive sector. So you may challenge that depending on the health of the people. But when you are retired, you rely on pension, and the pension has to be paid on time, and we must improve on the real value of the pension. That's the way I see it.
Suzote?
Oh, I just wanted to make a similar point to that of the minister, that one area that there's been a focus on across the continent is how to make sure that pension is more easily available. I mean, my mother was similar to the example that was described earlier in the panel, where because she'd worked in government for 30 years, she didn't mind having to travel to go and get her money, but there was not very much left after she traveled to get the money. So now with the payment systems that have changed, you're seeing that a lot of pensioners and older people are getting resources more quickly. The other thing that's happening around the world is I think everybody's recognizing from owners of capital point of view that a lot of older people actually do have a lot of resources that can be invested. So the private sector is spending a bit more time around the world trying to understand this group, the 60 to 80-year-olds, and how significant they are from a business point of view. So it's not just to help them because they're old, but it is that they actually represent a great economy that can be leveraged to bring resources to things.
We have time for maybe like one more question. So perhaps the gentleman with the scarf at the back. And if he's quick, we can get the other one. Okay? Why are we...
Hello, my name is Renaud Dusavi from Togo. I have two questions. The first one is that the digital system and the new tech and all this, one of the aspects that we don't usually regard is the point of energy and resources. I'm thinking of raw materials, and the way we produce the energy. So how do big countries like Nigeria and India addressing the issue of energy and resources in thinking of the next or 2 decades about the increasing of the use of new technology and cell phone service and all that? So we preparing or paving the way to support the huge consumptions of resources and energy, and how do they prepare to provide that? And on the second point, I would address the issue of the youth again, because and I will talk as a young man, a young African, we do have the persistent feeling that the people in charge right now are somehow disconnected with our realities. And so there is some kind of, not only tension, but maybe a rupture between the 2 generations. There will be some generational gap, which is more pronounced because we have the feeling that somehow we will have, as a youth, to deal with the next decades or in the next half century. So how are we addressing this kind of issue to maybe open more the way to us to sooner and earlier entry to be in charge and getting more and more experience? We are talking about money, but also management and governmentship, so that we can, as a young man, be in charge maybe sooner and have more experience to deal with the continent in the next or 2 decades. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both those questions. The disconnect between the youth and the leaders, I think, is critical, and thank you for raising that. And the second question was new technology and its interface with energy and resources. So could the panel perhaps take the disconnect question first? Actually, Dr. Kati, you addressed a couple of solutions that India offered in terms of bringing in youth into national planning and strategy. Anything else?
No, if you permit, let me first answer her question. In the context of India, we have a central legislation passed by the parliament which makes it mandatory for all children to look after their parents when they are old. And if they are not looked after, the mechanisms and legal provisions of the Act comes into operation. That is one. Second one is, in respect of large number of poor old persons, unfortunately in India we become senior citizens at 60. In terms of large number of poor old people, the federal government as well as state governments transfers monthly money for their taking care of them. They are meeting their essential needs. Today, the government, through a special scheme called Jan Dhan, has opened millions and millions of accounts for poor people. And I mentioned to you earlier, we have an Aadhaar scheme, and unique identification number is allowed to each individual. Therefore, the money directly flows to her or his account. And large number of them are given something called a service card, known as RuPay card also, so the withdrawal of money becomes easier. So government, to the best of its capacity, has taken legislative, administrative and other financial measures to see that people at old age are looked after and cared for. Coming to the question of energy conservation and better utilization of energy in the years to come, this is one of the salient concepts of sustainable development. India is a pioneer in solar energy harnessing, and you may be aware that maybe 1 year or 2 back, International Solar Alliance was constituted along with France, and large number of countries are now members of that panel, and various steps are being taken to see that solar derived energy becomes popular. And India today, solar energy clothes have become so cheap, so that people are definitely opting for solar energy in place of conservation energy like coal, etc. Thank you.
Since we just have like a couple of minutes left, I would like to ask the panelists to offer the most important thought you can leave us all with when it comes to digitization today in Africa. And I would like you to include in your responses how to address the youth disconnect gap. Let's start with Mrs. Ote.
I think that the digital economy is the opportunity of our time. We are in a good position on the Africa continent because, as everyone has alluded to, we have a youthful population. If we don't take advantage of this fourth industrial revolution, I think what could happen is that there'd be job losses, and what the youth being, the people call it a demographic dividend, could become a time bomb. So it is the opportunity to focus on, and having youth at the table, making sure that we're providing youth the tools. I do think that if I had to make choices, focusing on human capital is extremely the way to go. And I say human capital, it's providing the right education, but making sure that we're supporting the more than 2,500 innovation centers, that we don't have to just go to Silicon Valley, that we can go to Silicon Savannah. We've got a number of, many of them on the continent, but it is the opportunity of our time. And I'm really appreciative that the African Development Bank decided to include this in the agenda. I was hoping that we'll get to hear from the president of the African Development Bank, but I do want to say that he revolutionized agriculture in Nigeria because he thought he could leverage technology. And even the farmers who were not very well educated were able to benefit from, I think there were 10 million farmers who benefited from the program, from the mobile wallet program in Nigeria. So it is the opportunity. Inclusion is key, and digital economy will help us do that.
Honorable Minister?
The digital economy is part of the globalization process, and there's no way we can run away from it. It's a fact, it's a reality, and we have to live with it. And I see it growing outside the microfinance realm, more to go into the public sector payments, pension workers, and even providing finance for agricultural farmers. One thing we have to make sure we get right is the infrastructure backbone. We have to fix it in African countries. Few countries have a very effective national switch, because you must allow the service providers to communicate to themselves, to accept one another. I think it's important that we work on the backbone to make sure it's very effective. That's because if it is not effective, we disrupt the entire market and create a whole social crisis, and we make sure we have to avoid that. Also important is both the legal and the regulatory framework. I think it's also important that we look at our laws, the Banking Act, the Central Bank Act, and the likes. Look at them. If they are silent on innovative financing, we'll make sure we put that one in place. Otherwise, I see a series of litigation along the way, because we should also be mindful about the fear, the apparent fear of some of the banks in this type of economy, because there's some element of displacement. How they keep up to the challenge is a good thing. I was happy when the governor from the Bank of Ghana spoke about initial response of the commercial banks, and now they have changed their attitude. It's part of the deal. I mean, they have to. They don't seem to. They cannot be left in the cold. I think it's also important to bring them to speed. The other issue of the cyber security networks have to be improved. That's all part of the backbone. The governments are to invest. That is where really public sector capital is required. Capital is required for the public sector. The government manages the cyber security networks and manages the entire backbone. So we have to make sure we do some investment in that, in addition to strengthen the regulatory and legal frameworks for us to move on.
Dr. Addison, final thought?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is no doubt that digitization would continue to be very transformative in terms of its effect, not only on the financial sector, but also on various aspects of our economy. I think that it's important in the case of Ghana that we have devoted our oil resources to address this intergenerational issue to the extent that this area issues of generations recently we have announced the Nation Builders Corps, which is also another youth employment program. But more importantly, I think it's the fact that the government has decided to use the oil resources to provide free secondary education, address the issue of human capital, which I think would be very key in terms of how we use digital technology to transform our economy in the long term. Thank you.
Dr. Kati, final word.
I'll just make 2 sentences, nothing new. Having accepted that digital technology enhancement is critical for progress of each one of us, then we have to do 2-3 things which are important. All government, everybody must invest to build digital infrastructure. The more you invest, the more the benefits. 10% increase in broadband lead to 1% increase in GDP growth. And secondly, create a policy environment in which digital technology can flourish. And thirdly, create human capacity, general capacity and specialized capacity so that digital technology continue to flourish. Unless these 3 things are done, things are going to be difficult. So this must be the 3 foundational pillars upon which each one of us has to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please give a warm round of applause for our excellent panelists and the insights that they offered. Thank you. Thanks everyone, and have a great day, and please enjoy the coffee outside. Thank you.